Hello, everyone. I'm going to be a little more subdued today because we kind of have some important things to talk about. Um, I want to give everyone a few minutes to come on. So, just regular things. Let's remember Mike. Again, Facebook page has links to Mike and Pastor Allen in Kenya. Mike, again, we're trying to help him out. Same thing with Pastor Allen. He's basically our missionary in Kenya and doing some good work down there. So, evangelizing, trying to build a bigger, broader community. One supports each other, just like we pray for everyone here. MH 1953, let us know if anything's happened positive on your end with your husband's search for a job. Um, Obviously, to, we're kind of having to put a pause on Revelation 13, although interestingly, it really does tie into a lot that's going to happen here today. So I'm going to leave it open. I'm going to do a lot more question and answer. I mean, normally y'all ask questions, I answer. You make a comment, I'll respond. So nothing big there, but I'm probably going to do a little bit more today because we've had some interesting developments. And I kind of wanted to sort of just jump on it and talk about it because, people see certain things, they have questions. And this was a big thing. I'm not going to lie. This was a big thing. Although if you've read my books, you kind of saw it coming, right? There's been some things that I've even said, like, hey, this is the kind of stuff that we're going to be seeing. And I kind of want to, I want to make something very, very clear because what we're going to see is not the rise of the Antichrist yet. But what we're seeing is the development of of two things. Where there's two things going on right now, and we need to understand what those things are so we can be prepared and we can have the appropriate answers for everyone. Okay, MH 1953 has let us know that her husband had several interviews and callback interviews, but as in all things, the wheel grinds slowly. I love that phrase. Believe me, I understand. Um, when you're trying to get that next job, everything just takes forever. I understand. We all do. So we will continue to lift you and your husband up in prayer. It's like I said, we're going to just do a few more minutes, then we'll hop on, and we'll actually do this, hardcore. But yeah, what we're seeing is the rise of two different things here, and we need to really delineate what they are, because modern evangelical thinking on eschatology, and really most even non-evangelical, most modern eschatology misses a lot of these things, because there's so much of a focus on the Roman Church, right? In the past, there's so much of a focus on there's some things that we kind of missed. So I want to discuss those a little bit more fully. Then next week we can go back and we'll talk about Revelation 13, the second half, which is the false prophet, and of course the infamous 616:6, and we can discuss that more. Quick news. Tex had a chest x-ray and everything's going well. Apparently he's responding very positively to the treatments. They're very encouraged with what they're seeing. So good on him. Answer prayer. Everything's looking pretty good for him. So, I mean, I know we're all happy to hear that. And just keep texting your prayers. Lung clot, blood clots in your lungs, never a good situation, but he seems to be okay. So hopefully, like I said, let's just keep him in your prayers. But it's working. Medication's working. He's healing. The clots are getting smaller. His body's reabsorbing them slowly. So hopefully he'll be back to his normal curmudgeon-y self. So, all right, we'll go ahead and start with prayer. Then we'll just jump right into it. Heavenly Father, we thank you and we praise you for all that you've done. Father, there is so much happening right now. Help us to keep our hearts and our minds focused on you. Help us to seek your will in all things. Give us the strength to say the things that need to be said at the appropriate time. Help us to retain our tongue and restrain it from saying things we shouldn't at inappropriate times. Help us to see your hand in all things, good or bad. Heavenly Father, you promise that you never leave us or forsake us, and we at this time remember that. No matter how bad things seem to be or things get, we know that you're there and that you are working in all things. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Okay. I'm going to start by saying two things. Firstly, nothing I am about to say has any bearings on the current administration one way or the other. In fact, everything I'm about to say, you could have literally is going to be lifted from the books I did years ago, right? And that's why we're going to focus on that material. Like, if y'all want to get them, fine. If not, I'm going to tell you everything that's important tonight anyway. So don't worry about it. The reason we're talking about it now, and we're going to talk about it in this way, is because we are about to see what we're seeing right now is the unfolding of the greatest bait and switch in human history. Straight up. That's what's about to happen. If you know your con terms, you know what a bait and switch is. Okay. Okay, Titan, I'm not going to have to shave in January. Don't even. No, his beard is going away again. It's a bet we have going. So, what happened today? And some of y'all may not have even heard about it. So because it's interesting how the media handles some of these things sometimes. A friend of mine, I sort of hit up a friend of mine. He's like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Well, I had to go to the BBC." And I'm like, "Well, of course, because it was something. You want actual news? Don't do anything in the U.S. Go overseas." Anyway. So for those of you who aren't unaware, today was announced, right, that there was a peace treaty between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. For those of you who are maybe unfamiliar with the UAE, essentially you've got Saudi Arabia, and then you have a lot of these little tiny nations. Most of them actually don't have a lot of oil in them, and so they really don't have a lot of they didn't. Some of them have oil, but not a lot did, like Dubai. So they sort of came together and created this coalition of these smaller nations, and a lot of them kind of became this sort of economic free zone. That's why Dubai has blown up, right? It is absolutely the reason Dubai is so wealthy is because it's sort of literally. It's an economic free zone. It is exactly the example of some things that we really should be doing here. But that's what the UAE is. They are Arabs, they are Muslim, but they aren't necessarily the oil wealthy. Some of them do have oil and natural gas, but mostly they are sort of the smaller, less powerful nations. And they're all sort of clumped together around the Arabian Peninsula. So, UAE. They've now established a peace treaty with Israel, which opens up a lot of individuals from the Emirates to travel to Israel to go pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, those kinds of things, see the sites. This is a huge step forward for those who haven't, who maybe have not sort of paid attention to the Middle East as closely, or you've been relying on our media here, which again is abysmal. There for a long time. There's been even since the beginning of the Trump era, there was this thought that a lot of the Saudis came out and said, this guy, he knows what he's doing here. That he sort of speaks their language. He's a deal maker. And I kind of pointed out even back then, we're given the time frame again. For those of you who are who are on this channel frequently, what I've talked about, right? We've talked about the 2017 alignment, 2027, all of that. So I'm like, it wouldn't surprise me if the third temple went up prior to 2027. That wouldn't, or at least its construction would have begun. Well, a lot of things have to happen for that third temple to be set up, right? Obviously, right now the Dome of the Rock is there currently. However, there are some who have speculated that actually if the Al-Aqsa Mosque was removed, you could put the temple there. And essentially you just wouldn't wall it in. And you'd still be where you're supposed to be. So again, we've talked about a lot of these things. So let's put a lot of this together. In the books, one of the things I talked about is I wouldn't be surprised if a figure known as the Prince of the Covenant in Daniel, we're talking about that in a second, arose. The thing is, people would look at him, and because of the state of our eschatology, we would say he's the Antichrist. Why? Because what are we told, right? The guy who brings peace to the Middle East is the Antichrist, because we hear that there is, that through peace he'll deceive many. Well, here's the thing. There is this other figure that he gets one line. That's it, right? And the thing is, because of the nature of its placement in Scripture, most people sort of ignored him or ignored this figure because it's already sort of occurred. And what I mean by that is, when we get to Daniel, here, let me just go ahead and open it. La, la, la. Here we are. When we get to Daniel 11, and we're getting to this part where, the kings and everything, well, a lot of this already happened way back in the day with the with Antiochus Epiphanes and all that. So most people looked at the prince of this line in 1122, right, and said, well, that all probably happened back then, has nothing to do with it here. And Jesus' comment about the abomination of desolation, that's sort of saying, hey, that's that's just sort of a reference to what's going to happen. But I think what we have is a dual layer prophecy throughout this whole section. This is about the Antichrist, right? So let me just go ahead and read this section. We'll start in 21 and we'll go to 23, because that's really our focus for this moment. And in his place shall arise a vile person, to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peacefully, and seize the kingdom by intrigue. With the force of a flood they shall be swept away from before him, and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. And after the league is made with him, and all shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. So it goes on. You can read it on your own time. We'll put the infamous non-photo blue pencil of demarcation there. So what's being said? What's being said is the Antichrist, this vile person who comes into power, right? This character is going to come up. He's going to come in peacefully. He's going to deceive many. He's going to defeat this figure called the Prince of the Covenant. And it's after this defeat that the nations go and become in league with him. And I want to talk about what the covenant is and what league means here, and just because it's important to understand. The Prince of the Covenant, that word that we translate as covenant, is literally a holy covenant. It is a good thing. When it says all the nations come in league with him after that defeat, the word there is literally in Hebrew the intertwining of cords, like you would do for a magic ritual in the Middle East, right? There's some kind of rope magic. I don't understand it. Not really anything I spent my time on, but it was sort of like the twisting together. I think Kabbalah kind of has some of that still today with their bracelets, right? It's these weaving of cords. Well, that weaving of cords is the word that is used here for league. So what happens is this Prince of the Covenant is destroyed, or defeated at least, and then these other nations come to him and they become intertwined, right? It's a sinister thing. It's not a good thing. It's an evil thing. So here's what's so here's the big thing. And tighten up, we're going to get to that here in a second. Here's why this is important. We need to understand. I'm going to read some sections out of the books here in just a bit. We need to understand, I've talked about this in the past, the connection between Islam and the Antichrist. We in the West tend to focus on Rome. Well, here's the problem. We do that because we're we basically come from Europeans, right? And the Protestant church, who was the big persecutor of the Protestant church? Rome. So we kind of just assume they're the bad guys, right? Plus, there's a lot of Roman imagery in Revelation. Now, I will say Rome does play a role, but it's not the role we think, or at least it's not the completion. We really need to turn our attention to Islam. Now, to understand, I mentioned the bait and switch earlier. Here's what I mean, and I'm going to explain this in just a second. So, what is going to happen is we've all been told whoever brings peace to the Middle East, that's the Antichrist. This is not the case. But what will happen, and what is already happening now and has been for several years now, is you will hear about a figure called Al-Dajjal. The Dajjal is, if you can look him up right now, they'll say he is the Islamic Antichrist, or they'll even say the Islamic name for the Antichrist. And this is important. When whoever this figure ends up being, whether it's Trump or someone within his administration, or maybe not even anyone else that we know of yet, eventually brings peace in the Middle East, this prince is going to be called, some people will say, hey, that's the Antichrist. Others are going to say he's the Dajjal. They're going to say, well, who's Al-Dajjal? Well, and then everyone will say, well, he's the Islamic version of the Antichrist, or at least that's the same name. Here's why that's a misnomer. Now, it is true from a literary context to say that Dajjal is the Islamic version of the Antichrist. Here's why it's both true and untrue. Again, from a literary context of a messianic figure destroying the opposing figure, right? That's as far as these figures go, that would be correct. However, is the Islamic Messiah a good guy? So I'm going to pull up some lines here. We're going to go side by side here, right? So let's talk about who and what the Islamic Messiah is. Some people say, you probably think, well, it wasn't that Muhammad. No, actually, the closest would be really Moses would be the best way to think of it. In Islamic eschatology, and again, differing schools of Islam have differing views on this, but the common themes here are that there is a final caliph coming, a Mahdi. That's his name, or that's the title, right? That's their Messiah, is the Mahdi. He's the appointed one. He will have Muhammad's spirit, and he will rule from Jerusalem for, depending on who's doing the writing, between 7 years and 10 years. Some say longer, but generally most come to about 7 or 10 years. And he's the final caliph before the day of judgment arrives. He is flanked with, or he's associated with, Isa ibn Maryam, which is the Islamic name for Jesus, or literally Jesus, son of Mary. It is, depending on the view, again, sometimes they get reversed, but the broad strokes here are that he will either aid the Mahdi or even just straight up defeat this figure called Al-Dajjal. He is going to, yes, if you recognize the name Mahdi, it's because you probably recognize it from Dune. Frank Herbert absolutely stole a lot of the stuff from Islamic eschatology. A lot of the names, figures, places, they were all sort of pulled out of that milieu. So the Mahdi, he's coming. He goes to fight the Dajjal. Isa ibn Maryam, or with their idea of Jesus, who was not crucified, will come from heaven and either defeat the Dajjal directly or just aid the Mahdi in his destruction of the Dajjal and his forces. And then he will turn and force the world to worship the Mahdi. Let me go through a description of some of the things that Isa ibn Maryam will do. So after he's descended from heaven, flanked by angels, just keep that imagery in mind, and he's done the war against the Dajjal, he becomes sort of this chief priest figure. He directs all worship to Mahdi. He's then charged by the Mahdi with the destruction of all non-believers by beheading. He will also mark on the forehead and right hand of all true Muslims with the signet ring of Solomon. This is the generalized. I mean, you'll find some people who have some slightly different interpretations, but by and large, this is the Islamic eschatology. There is a signet ring. He'll mark all of the true Muslims on the forehead and on the right hand, kind of coincidental with Revelation 13. Again, it is important to remember that this is the Islamic name for Jesus. This person who's coming is claiming to be Jesus. You know what? At this point, give me a second, and then we will hop into Revelation 13, because I think this is a very appropriately timed. Now that I've thought about it, we may go slightly longer. I apologize for that. So, who's this Al-Dajjal, or the Dajjal? Who is this figure that is defeated? Well, Al-Dajjal is the false Messiah. That's the Arabic. That's what it means. He is this false Messiah who deceives the world. He leads an army that includes 70,000 Jewish troops. He's described as being blind in one eye, possibly due to an injury that some scholars get weird on that, but he's blind in his right eye. It also talks about how he rises to power, and it's one of those things where it's his defeat that ushers in the Mahdi and his in the Mahdi's rise to prominence. So here's the bait and switch, right? Whoever this coming prince of the covenant, this holy covenant, the person who brings peace to the Middle East, right? He comes. He brokers the peace. This isn't going to sit well with some people. Christians, there will be Christians who will call him the Antichrist, others will call him the Dajjal. People will say, oh, they must be the same thing. But we've just seen who does Ibn Isa and Miriam sound like? Who does Dajjal sound, or not Al-Dajjal, who does Mahdi sound like? It is the Antichrist and the false prophet. Straight up. That's what they are. In fact, we're going to turn to Revelation 13 and prove that one more time. But obviously, that's who these figures are. But right now, the argument's being passed that Dajjal and the Antichrist are the same figure. Well, what's the bait and switch here is obvious. Once the Dajjal is destroyed by Jesus, who comes from the sky, everyone's going to look and say, well, we were told in our scriptures that Jesus would come from heaven and defeat the Antichrist. We were told the Antichrist was the guy who brings peace to the Middle East, and they said that the Dajjal is the Antichrist, and they said that Jesus would come and defeat the Dajjal. This is clearly the same guy. This is all the same thing. We're good. We'll just listen to who this Mahdi is. That's how you turn everybody around. It's a bait and switch. But just to prove it, let's jump ahead. Let's jump back to Revelation 13. We're going to talk more about, we'll actually get into Revelation 13 deliberately more next week, but let's just see what happens here. Who is the beast of the earth? Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, because we talked about the beast from the sea last week. That's the Antichrist. And then I saw another beast coming out of the earth, and he had two horns. We'll talk about that in a second. Like a lamb, and spoke like a dragon. Again, like a lamb. So this is important. The beast looks like a lamb. Why is that important? Who is the lamb? Jesus. So this is something that looks like Jesus. Has two horns, and as we will recall, we'll go into more detail. The two horns signify two different leaders. Horns are individual leaders in the book of Revelation and in the book of Daniel. So he looks like a lamb, but he speaks like a dragon. And he exercises all of the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell within it to worship the first beast. Again, what does Isa ibn Miriam do after the defeat of Dajjal? He forces everyone to worship Mahdi. And beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. We'll talk about that later. He performs great signs, so that even he makes fire come down from the heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast. telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, and of the image that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Okay. So that's what we got. Islamic eschatology is Christian eschatology reversed. The good guys are the bad guys, and the bad guys are the good guys. Their Messiah is our Antichrist. Their Isa ibn Maryam is our false prophet. Their Al-Dajjal is our Prince of the Covenant. It is a reversal. So, yes, Tina, we're going to come to all those questions here in just a second, because there is a really interesting one. So, what is happening here is that we are seeing the foundations being laid for, again, the bait and switch. Right now, most people have wrong interpretations of things. This is why I focus on the text. This is why I keep telling everyone, don't believe me about anything. Double check the text yourself. We have to remember what the text actually says, not what our pastors are said or some eschatology teachers said. We actually have to look at the text, and we have to be really focused on what it says, not what we want it to say. Because this is how the world gets deceived. Think about it. We have a book that literally lays out everything that's about to happen, and yet there's going to be a whole bunch of people who are like, I don't see it. How is that possible? It's possible because they were taught the wrong thing. They were believing one thing, and when that didn't happen, the rug gets pulled out from underneath them. Well, guess what? When you're a kid, this is actually why if there are children watching, shut it off real quick, and then you can come back. But it's like the whole thing about Santa Claus. Like, my parents, we never did Santa. Like, we understood that Santa was always more like a game as a child, because we did everything December on the evening, right? That's what we did. It was our family's traditions, right? It's like when you tell that kid, hey, there's no Santa Claus, their world is destroyed and everything falls out from underneath them. And they're like, well, what do I even really know anymore? It is I'm not a fan of much of the eschatology teaching that has gone on for so long, because it has very much ignored these other verses that absolutely lead to another interpretation. And because we made everything adversarial, instead of saying, hey, this is my reading, what's your reading? Well, let's review all the different readings of the text, and then let's just have it all in mind, so when it does actually happen, we'll be aware. Because what if we're all sort of off a little bit, but we're all right a little bit? We can make those adjustments. Instead, we've created camps and we fight against each other so that we can't really see what's happening. It's in that fog of us fighting that most of us don't even know what the others really are saying or really seeing. And so there's no real intelligent conversation happening. We have been programmed to think one thing: Antichrist brings peace. There is not one verse in here that says he brings peace at all. He will destroy many through peace. Yes, he confirms a covenant. That's important. He's not the originator of a covenant. He is a confirmer of a covenant. Let's take a few steps back. So we have the Antichrist taking power in 11:21, and then we talk about the defeat of the Prince of the Covenant in 22. And it's after that everyone goes into league with the Antichrist in verse 23. But what happens just before that? In verse 20, there shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. And the Antichrist takes power after that. What's in verse 18? All right. 14 through 18, this is another leader. What we're seeing is in these verses, there are prior leaders that lead up to this event, this coming of the Antichrist. I think the important things there, he talks about the raising of taxes. Why is that important? Well, why would he raise taxes on the glorious land? How could he raise taxes on the glorious land? The glorious land is Israel. Israel's an independent nation right now. Let's try this again. It is now. It won't be for very long. It will be part of that final kingdom. Last week, what did we talk about? The different creatures from Daniel are all combined for the Antichrist, right? He has united them, and yet it's a separate thing altogether. He's over all these nations. What does that mean? Well, the four-headed leopard, if it was a reformation of the Alexandrian Empire, which I would argue that it is, then Israel has to be a part of it. Why would Israel join this other thing? Well, again, let's go back to what is Islamic. What is Islam? How does Islam work? And let's talk about what this peace treaty could be. If I could see this, somebody out there who's smarter than I am has seen this. There's an obvious way to bring peace to the Middle East. I'm just gonna lay it out. What is it that the Islamic radicals are looking for? They want to bring Sharia court or Sharia law everywhere. That's their goal. That is the entire purpose of Islam. Ask any religious scholar, they'll tell you it is to bring Islam and Sharia law specifically to the world. That's their goal. Under Islamic law, a caliphate can protect, you can be a non-Muslim and live there, but what you do is you pay the jizya, it's tax. You pay it to the caliph. And for that, what happens is you're protected because you're saying, I'm under subjection to the laws. Here's my taxes. The caliph says, groovy. You can be a heretic and live here, and we're all kosher. We don't care because you're bringing in the bank. Here's the deal. Very broad terms. There is a new caliphate set up. The old Ottoman Empire is sort of reformed in some way, probably as a council at first, like a UN. Israel is included. Israel pays a jizya. In return, they're allowed to build they're allowed to build their temple one way or another. That means every Jew living in Israel is safe because Israel is paying a tax. So all non-Muslims living in Israel who are citizens of Israel are safe. The caliph has declared them safe because they're paying the jizya. And this is something we don't understand because we haven't really had a caliphate for almost 100 years. No, literally 100 years now. The caliphate was destroyed during World War I. A caliph has complete in total power in Islam. Think Pope, only with more power. If the caliph says they're kosher, you can't hurt them, even the radicals would leave them alone because they're paying the jizya. They are under Sharia law. That's what they want. The creation of a new caliphate. And the nations of the world saying, if you're registered with the caliphate, you can go and be judged by their law, would end every radical extremist terrorist group right now. That's it. It doesn't mean we all have to live under it. But if you're a Muslim and you can say, hey, I'm going to go be a part of this caliphate, even if I'm living here in the US or in Canada or Mexico or whatever, if something happens, I get to go to them and say, I want to be judged by them. You would never see another bomber. Why? Because that's what they want. That is some way down the line going to be some kind of a deal. At least that's my theory. But the thing that's almost certain to happen is Israel will join this reborn caliphate. They will pay a jizya. That's what will allow them to build the temple. That is what will keep them safe. Because remember, peace and safety. That's what's going to keep everyone kosher because they're paying the jizya. That's also why everyone's going to go to Israel after this, in Revelation 12, we were talking about, right? After 2027, something bad's going to happen, and the dragon's going to chase her into Israel, basically the Jews into Israel. Why? Because that's the one place you could be safe. If you're not paying tax, if you're not paying the jizya, then you're not safe, right? So you'd have to move to Israel to be safe because Israel's the one paying the taxes. Looks like someone's going to try and raise the taxes. He's going to die. Then the Antichrist is going to show up. And this is all going to spiral. From where, just as support, where is it? Because the Bible is very specific. Where does the Antichrist come from? So just so let's answer a bunch of questions right now. Where does the Antichrist come from? Because it tells us explicitly where he comes from. He doesn't come from New York. He doesn't come from Rome. He comes from Turkey. Now, how could I possibly say that he comes from Turkey? Well, give me a moment. Let me pull up all the references here. So, let's talk about, firstly, the Old Testament. All throughout the Old Testament, we have this figure called the Assyrian. He's called the Assyrian in Micah. He's the ruler over Gog and Meshech and Tubal. By the way, Magog is actually modern Turkey. And again, the Assyrian, classic Assyria has both what is modern Syria and Turkey. Meshech and Tubal are the Balkans. At least that's the theory. We also have, those have high Islamic populations now. Jesus himself talks about Pergamus, right, being the seat of Satan. We've talked about that in the past. How that was Pergamus is in Turkey. It was the Pergamum altar that was eventually moved to Germany. It was sort of that big thing in Germany after which Nazi Germany emerged. Adolf Hitler really loved that Pergamum altar. We also have in Old Testament, when the Messiah is prophesied to fight against, in Habakkuk, it's Timan, which is in Arabia, Cush, which is Sudan and Somalia today, Midian, that's Jordan, and Isaiah talks about Babylon, which is Iraq and Iran, and Assyria, which is Turkey, and then, of course, Egypt. So in the Old Testament, he's the Assyrian. But there's even a more specific reference, and that is also in Daniel. Let's just go ahead and pull them up here. Daniel 8 talks about the horns, right? So the vision of the ram and the goat, right? So long story short, ram, goat has two horns. So the ram has two horns. That's Medo-Persia. The ram of Sam. Okay, so anyway, ram, one horn. That's Alexander the Great. No big deal. Everyone in the universe literally says, yes, this is Alexander the Great. Therefore, the male goat grew very great. That's Alexander the Great. But when he became strong, the large horn, see his one horn, that's Alexander the Great, one empire, it was broken. And in place of it, four notable ones came up toward the four winds of heaven. So those are the four generals, right, that replaced after Alexander's empire was separated. It turns into four different kingdoms, four different generals. And out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and toward the glorious land. So real quick, in particularly the Old Testament, but really just throughout the Bible, unless they tell you very specifically that there is another cardinal point that's north or south or east or west of, if they just randomly say it's east and west, and consider the cardinal point to be Jerusalem at all times. Jerusalem is the heart of the Bible. Everything's about Jerusalem, period, end of story, unless otherwise notified. It's like, well, it's to the west of this city here. if it's particularly prophetically, it is Jerusalem that you need to care about. So this horn, right, one of the four, that is great towards the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. So that's the kingdom that had Israel. So there's this one horn that, so out of the four, there's one of them, and it grew up to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the hosts and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. He even exalted himself as the high prince of the host, and by him daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, it's the King James, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, for 2,300 days, and then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Okay. That is the final 3.5 years of the 7-year period. That horn that grows out of that land is the Antichrist. This is as clear as day. No one argues this. Some people have said, well, isn't this Antiochus Epiphanes? In a sense, yes, but that's a dual prophecy. Antiochus Epiphanes, the desolation of the desolation that he brings there, or the abomination of desolation he brings there, was a type and shadow of the final one that Jesus spoke of. So, how does this tell us where the Antichrist has to come out of? Well, again, because we have, literally, it's telling us who, again, it comes out of one of the four generals, right? One of the four generals. Who's the general who owned Israel at the time and owned the area around him? Well, let me see if I can actually pronounce his name. And I just had it here. Where'd it go? And I just lost it. Anyway, long story short, where did he go? That's more Islamic stuff. That's Zechariah. I really should have highlighted that. Should be right here. Oh well. So we'll just chalk it up to a name I can't pronounce, because that's probably entirely true, as I am a Texan. Anyway, long story short, we have four generals. The one that owns Israel was actually centered in Turkey. Turkey is where his empire was. Again, let's just assume I can't pronounce his name, because I'm not gonna. The horn grows out of Turkey. That is where he's coming from. He's called the Assyrian. Again, Jesus is very specifically calling out Pergamus as the seat of Satan in the book of Revelation. Why? Because the Antichrist comes out of Turkey. That is where he's coming from. He is Gog of Magog, right? Yeah, I should have highlighted it, and I didn't. I paid for it. He is the chief of Magog. Magog is Turkey. This is the argument for the Antichrist coming from somewhere other than Turkey is ludicrous. It just is. He comes from Turkey. Sorry to point this out. I don't care if you're thinking about Ronald Reagan or Bush or Obama or Trump. None of these people came from Turkey. Now, you could ask about Erdogan. He looks a little weird. I'm going to be honest. Erdogan, he's doing some weird things. I would not be surprised. But at the same time, it looks like there's a succession of leaders prior to the Antichrist coming. We still have some time, so it's probably not going to be Erdogan. The point is, he does come out of Turkey. Islam is all throughout the New Testament and the Old Testament. It's there. Again, as we've talked about in the past, the Antichrist's prophetic name is Lucifer. Lucifer is not the devil. That's not his angelic name. That is the prophetic name of the Antichrist. And the importance of that is, what is Lucifer? It's Venus. Venus is the star in the Star and Crescent. That's what it is. The Star and Crescent is the symbol, as we've discussed prior. It is the symbol of the Antichrist, and it is what is centered around every single kingdom. Hold on. Why Turkey specifically? Because no. Okay, we'll come to that in a second. The Star and Crescent is the symbol of the Antichrist ruling any particular given kingdom. It is Islam this is coming from. Why Turkey? Well, like I just said, the Old Testament, the figure is the Assyrian. That is literally the name given to what we would call the Antichrist. Classic Assyria is Turkey. It is Turkey, and then what is modern day Syria, and you can talk about the Kurds, a little bit beneath that. But that's where it is. Secondly, where the horn comes out of, that is tighten up. We'll come to that in a second. That horn that comes out of it tells us precisely where the kingdom that he rules is. It is the one of the four generals of Alexander that owned Jerusalem. Well, it owned Jerusalem all the way up into Turkey. That's the area we were given. That's what it was. That's his kingdom. Pergamus, which again, Pergamum altar, Jesus calls that the seat of Satan. That is not a random thing. He had any number of churches in Asia he could have written to, and he chose Pergamus and said specifically that is the kingdom, or that city has the throne of Satan. Also, very important, he could have written to any number of churches. It didn't have to be Asia, which is again just Turkey. He could have, all of those kingdoms were in Turkey. Why? Why weren't any of the letters going to anywhere else? Anywhere else in the entire Roman Empire. Could have gone to anywhere in Egypt, what we would consider most of the Middle East, even the entire, Italy, Greece, any number of places that he could have written. But Jesus is like, nope, I want these 7 churches in Turkey and only there. Why? These are all indications of where the Antichrist is coming from. Because again, he is the Assyrian. He's the horn that comes from the area that was owned from there. Also, north. People have talked about, well, the people from the north, they come in Ezekiel, Gog and Magog. Magog is Turkey. End of story. That's, no one will argue that. The argument about it being the Russians is that, well, the Mogavians, aka the Scythians, eventually moved up to Russia. And that is true. The Russians are descended from the Scythians. But so are a bunch of other people. The fact that they say Magog, because that's where Magog was a person. He's one of the descendants of Noah. He settles in Turkey. We know, Josephus confirms, the Mogavians are the Scythians. So again, he's Gog of Magog. He's the Assyrian. He's the horn that comes out of this one land that, again, wouldn't exist until several hundred years in the future for Daniel. So it's out of the kingdom that was centered in Turkey. Revelation, all seven churches are in Turkey. The place that has the throne, Turkey. This is where he's coming from. Now, tighten up your question, or your second question about the Jewish descendant. So let me give some background and we'll jump into that, because that honestly is going to be a lot of things that we talk about here in the future. So there is the theory that the Antichrist is of Jewish descent, specifically from the tribe of Dan. Their symbol was a serpent. They seem to be kind of sketchy a little bit in the Old Testament. There's even, if you're a fan of the Naked Archaeologist, I am, he has a theory that the Danoi that are spoken of in Homer's Iliad are actually the tribe of Dan. The tribe of Dan, though they kind of had their inland area, they kind of said, well, we're going to be merchants, and they kind of jump on their ships and they go away. And so there's this theory that Dan was always kind of getting into trouble. They were always building altars to their gods. They were always sort of in this thing. And throughout the book of Daniel, which again is our cipher for the book of Revelation, it is, again, my argument, they're basically the same book because of the interplay between Daniel 12 and Revelation 10. So there is this theory that all throughout Daniel talks about, well, again, let's just open it up. It's right here anyway, right? All right, we've done the ram and the goat. You can go back into your holder. Okay. Sanctuary takes force and do damage. Okay. And the king, this is the Antichrist, shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, Jehovah, Yahweh, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. The argument here is where he says he shall regard neither the God of his fathers, is that this is actually the God. This is actually Yahweh. That is, yes, Paco, kind of sketchy, sort of like you. Like, just think of the tribe of Dan as being like just filled with you, Paco. It'll be fine. I know him. It's all fine. Anyway, yeah, but yes, the tribe of Dan is extremely sketchy in their behavior. Anyway, so there is this theory because it talks about that this is not just any God, that this is Yahweh that's being spoken of here, that he shall not regard, and that's the God of his fathers. But in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses and a God which his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, precious stones, pleasant things. Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. Very important point here. It doesn't say that he is the strongest. It says he's against the strongest fortresses. This is an important point. He may not have military rule over the entire planet. In fact, as we saw a little bit earlier in 29 and some of the earlier verses, or some later mid verses rather, of chapter 11, he's turned around by the forces of Kittim. Some people say that's Rome, which could just be symbolic of the West. So it doesn't look like he actually rules the entire planet. He may have power and authority over the planet, but he doesn't rule it militarily. That's an important point. But let's skip a little bit ahead to the end of verse of chapter 11, right? And where'd he go? And no one should help him. There's a thing here about him dying. No, it's not there. Anyway, I'll find it later. But anyway, the point is, there's this section here where it talks about him dying the death of, and yeah, well, whatever. Anyway, oh, hold on. Whatever. Point is, so there's this thought that he is a worshiper, or that his fathers were worshipers of Yahweh, and that he won't recognize Yahweh. He'll have this other God that his fathers didn't recognize, and that he dies the death of, maybe it's in 8, but anyway, he dies the death of the heathen, right? Why would that matter? Like, that wouldn't matter to him unless he was Jewish. That's the argument that is made. I think it is entirely possible that he could be of Jewish descent and yet also be Islamic. It's important to point out here that it does not use, in 11, when it talks about the God of his fathers, it doesn't say Yahweh. It's important there. It doesn't say Yahweh. It's still Elohim. The assumption, though, is that it's singular. It is possible that he is Jewish, but also Muslim. That is very much, this is still a truth, because he just has to be Jewish on his mother's side, meaning he just has to be of Jewish lineage. Coincidentally, so is Muhammad. I know it sounds a little weird, but give me a second. Muhammad, the tribe that he came from, they're Jewish. They were a Jewish tribe. They weren't practicing Judaism, but they were a Jewish tribe. Remember, Muhammad created what we call Islam today. That's where he comes out of. It's interesting to note, Marx, who was famously anti-Jewish, creator of communism, he was descended from Judaism. Same thing with Adolf Hitler, Muhammad. These were all people who were descendants of Judaism, but they weren't practitioners of Judaism. So there is the theory that the Antichrist will come out of Jewish stock. That's entirely possible. Again, his mother just has to be Jewish. That's the only thing that's required for him to have come out of sort of a Jewish lineage. And again, you have the diaspora that, the 70 AD, everyone goes everywhere. He could be of the tribe of Dan. And it's the Turkey aspect is really important to that even as well, because if he is the Danoi, or let me rephrase this, if the tribe of Dan are the Danoi, that as Jacob Simovich, I think, I can never pronounce his name, as his theory goes, if they are, well, where were they fighting? Turkey. The whole Helen of Troy, the Trojan Wars, Troy was in what's called classical Greece. There's two Greeces in the ancient world. There's classical Greece, and then there is the Aegean. The Aegean is what we think of as Greece now, right? That's the modern Greece. Classical Greece had the Aegeans and what we would call Turkey, right? Turkey was classical Greece. So yeah, it's very possible that he could be of Jewish lineage. We're going to talk a lot about some weird stuff that happens later in the book of Revelation, so I don't want to get too much into that. But you asked, but Titan also asked a great question about, is it possible that this fire from heaven is some sort of weapons platform mounted in satellites? We're talking about that later as well. I don't know. It just says fire from heaven, right? Again, false miracles, false things. I think in our modern day, we assume that this is all about technology. I'm certainly not going to argue that that's not the case. I think it's entirely possible. Oh, look, Pastor Bruce is here. Hey, Pastor Bruce. Yeah. Again, he's just confirming what I was saying. Okay, hold on. Look, I'm going to put this up. This is a good point. I'm going to give him the look. Yes, you're right. Bruce is 100% correct. The Jew, when we talk about Jews, it's specifically Judah and Benjamin. However, for most people who are not you, Bruce, it's anyone of Hebraic descent. But so let me be very specific. Muhammad was from a Hebraic lineage. Make us happy. I love you, Bruce. So yes, Hebraic, not necessarily. But most people don't get that distinction. Anyway, is it possible that these are all technological marvels? Yes, I genuinely think that a lot of what's going to happen, a lot of things that are going to persuade people, deceive people, is going to be based in the UFO phenomena that we're seeing today. I absolutely believe that's going to be the case. I may be right, I may be wrong, I don't know. But that's where I'm going to put my money. I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing this. Now, a big question I have about that, though, is it going to be that the UFO phenomena is purely a technological thing? I don't know, right? I'm not entirely certain. The longer that the ancient alien group is going, the further we get into the acceptance of UFOs in popular culture, the more that those who believe it, in UFOs as, I would say, probably non-sinister. Maybe, let me be very specific. I believe that some UFOs are absolutely just government technology. Absolutely true. I think, but for the non-human UFOs, there is UFOs that are of demonic descent. Now, some of them are technological. Some of them are just angels being angels, right? Forms of energy, whatever. But, so I'm just very clear. No, I don't think that there are little green men from Klaatu hanging around doing things, right? This is about angels, demons, Nephilim, whole 9 yards. But what I'm saying is, I don't know that it's necessarily going to be little green men from the planet Klaatu who are going to hop out of a spaceship and be like, Nanu. I don't know that we're not going to get some other variant of that. My point is the more popular ancient astronaut theory becomes, the more everyone seems to be adopting and accepting some of this very new age sort of take on it, right? This very ethereal, very religious view of these creatures. They're interdimensional. They're not physical creatures. They're interdimensional. They're telepathic. We communicate with them through taking DMT trips, Ouija boards, seances. This is all becoming a little bit more mainstream than like that used to be sort of on the fringe 10 years ago. Even for the UFO crowd, there was a fringe. But now it's kind of coming back into focus, and everyone's like, yeah, maybe it is this kind of thing. So while I do believe that ancient astronaut theory plays a role, absolutely. I do think the UFOs are going to play a role in this, absolutely. And so, yes, could these miracles be technological in origin? Absolutely. But I also hold out that they may present themselves as spiritual beings, right? They may have some other take on this that we may not be fully aware of yet. It's important not to put everything in today's terms. We need to kind of think down the line a little bit. So to be very specific, I don't know if it's like a satellite mounted laser beam. Maybe that's what it is. Don't know. But would I say that it's not? Oh, absolutely I wouldn't. In fact, Paco will remember this. We talked about this when it happened. There was a guy out in Nevada, going on nearly 20 years, maybe 17 years ago. Anyway, this dude, he called him, think Black Hebrew Israelite kind of person, right? He used the name Yahweh. Anyway, he's out there. He's being interviewed by this camera reporter. They're just trying to figure him out because he's out there preaching, right? Everyone's trying to figure out what's going on. And he's like, well, I'm going to call down God and angels. And he just starts yelling and screaming and talking about Yahweh and a command. And all of a sudden, this red light descends from the sky and kind of hovers there above in the video. And you can hear, like, even the dude, he's freaking out. He's like, whoa. He's like, yeah, no, man, that's me. It's all my power. I think he was calling himself Yahweh something. So he was doing these things. And all of a sudden, you could even tell he's like, play along. Like he remembers that he's supposed to, it's sort of like that whole Witch of Endor scene in Samuel where, Saul is there and the witch, tries to call up Samuel, and Samuel, the prophet, actually shows up and she's like, uh-oh. It's like, this wasn't supposed to happen. So my point is, I don't know that there won't be some aspect of supernaturalism involved. Like they may be very sort of thinly veiled. In fact, there's been this weird thing. If you've watched Ancient Aliens on the History Channel from beginning to end, like I have, because I apparently have nothing else to do. I've missed a couple episodes, I'll be honest. There is this weird thing theme that pops up again and again and again, which is the Garden of Eden, and that the Garden of Eden is a race memory of the aliens who genetically re-engineered us, and basically they paint it as the serpent being the good guy. It shows up several times throughout the series. I can't remember specifically which ones, and they've even used, like, David Hatcher Childress. I saved it because it was just so on point. I'm like, did he realize what he was saying? And again, I respect David Hatcher Childress, particularly as a student of megaliths, but he says very specifically that they'll bring their knowledge and will be like the gods. And I'm like, you just realized what you said. Like, that was verbatim what they said back in Genesis, like what the serpent said in Genesis. Like, you get that, right? And there's this constant repetition of the idea that the serpent was the good guy. I'm not convinced. So again, do I believe that UFOs and the UFO phenomenon that we're seeing today is going to play a role? Absolutely. In fact, I think we see, I would argue, what we would call three gray aliens in the book of Revelation towards the end. We'll go into more detail when we get there. I do think the Nephilim, it's all playing a role. But I'm not convinced that it's going to be all about little green men and UFOs. I think that I'm not convinced there isn't a lot more spiritualism going on, that there isn't going to be we are the serpent from the Garden of Eden. That's us. That's me. I'm Crawley. We brought you knowledge because knowledge is a good thing. Knowledge is power, right? We want to make you like us. I wouldn't be surprised if that's their take. For the longest time, I was convinced, like, no, they're going to try and hide all that. I'm not convinced about that anymore. I think that they are absolutely going to play hardcore. I think they're going to tell us exactly who they are. There'll be this very thin, veneer, right, of ETism or whatever, but it'll be, that's us. Your stories in Genesis, that's us. And we're interdimensional. So DMT, that's how you communicate with us. And we're all groovy over here. Go pray to that Mahdi person that we helped out. That's going to be awesome. So the point here is, have we entered the final week, right? No, we haven't. Just straight up. We have not entered the final week. It's okay. You can take your vacation. Are we, however, in the beginning throes of something much, much bigger? Oh, absolutely. And yes, Paco, this is why the whole UFO, this is why the whole UFO thing in truths are coming out. Like, don't kid yourselves. This, I've actually had this argument with Nick Redfern. He doesn't believe in disclosure, and I'm like, no, this is what this is. Like 2017, the United States military comes out and says UFOs are real, they're not ours, and nobody notices. But the reason they're doing this in little drips is because they're acclimating us. It's the frog metaphor, right? You go slowly so the frog doesn't realize the water starts to boil, and then the frog dies. So we are at the beginning, though, of the greatest bait and switch in human history. That's where we are. This is what you need to understand. There is a Prince of the Covenant. He's a good guy. It's a holy covenant. He's bringing peace. That is a good thing. He will be defeated by... Oh, okay. I'll come back to that. He will be defeated by a figure who will be the Antichrist. They will paint it the other way around. One of the central tenets of Islam is that we as Christians we contaminated our scriptures. That it was pure, but we twisted some things. We got some things wrong, and that's why Muhammad had to come. He was the final prophet. He came to fix us and fix all the things that we got wrong. That is a central tenet. The entire argument, I believe, that we are getting ready to be made. I think we see it in Islamic eschatology. I think we see it a little bit because, again, I don't think the Islam we see today is the Islam of the end days per se. I think there's still some evolution to happen and intertwining with the whole UFO phenomena. But I think it will be fundamentally UFO. We're going to have this figure, this Mahdi, defeat someone that both Christians called the Antichrist because he brought peace to the Middle East. Muslims are going to have called him Dajjal because he brought peace to the Middle East. They're going to say they're one and the same, so that when he's defeated by somebody who comes from the sky claiming to be Jesus, right? Everyone's going to say, well, the central tenet here was that the Christians got it wrong. They just, they got a few things wrong and they had to be corrected, but the basic premise is still there, right? Jesus defeats the Antichrist. We all agreed this dude was the Antichrist, so we'll do what Jesus says now. That's the bait and switch. As for how much time we have, I literally have no idea. Jesus didn't know the time of the day. I'm certainly not Jesus. I'm not even a prophet. I'm a dude at a desk, at a drawing desk. Don't take my word for anything. You double check it yourself. What I will say, what I have learned, and if I gun to my head, my thought is this. Jupiter returns to Regulus in 2027, right? That is the end of the actual alignment. That is the end of Revelation 12:5. After that is when the woman is chased into the place prepared in the desert, which is Israel. So 2027 is that boom, we're off to the races? Does he tarry 20, 30 years? Newton believed that the end of the world was around 2060. He could be right. There could be it could be 2027, boom, we're off to the races, right? Or it could be a year down the line, 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line. That's when everything kicks off. It just has to be after that event, right? After 2027. That's the only thing that's the only, oh, the little dog. That's the only thing that matters. That's the only real sign that we have. If I were a betting man, and I'm not because I have terrible luck, but if I were, I would say that and again, we'll talk about this more later, that there's an alignment of a lot of events and timelines between 2033 and 2040 that I find really kind of interesting and kind of okay. Like there's kind of a lot of things that line up there, and we can talk about those in the future. So if it were to start immediately after 2027, I wouldn't be surprised in the least. If he were to tarry until 2033, and that's when it started, I also would not be surprised. Could he tarry longer? That's up to him. That's God's timeline. That's not for me to know. What I will say though is this. This is the last call. If I had to put all my money on one thing, I'd say sometime between 2027 and 2033, that's when everything kicks off. The time that we have right now, between now and 2027, this is last call. This is the harvest. This is the time when you need to be the best Christian you can be, and you need to speak life into the lives of every human being you meet. We have to lay this all out on the field. We can't sit there and say, well, I got time. No, you don't have time. This is it. This is closing time. The bar back. They're up there putting the chairs. We got to go. You got to get everybody off the Titanic, right? Like I've said before. It's the Titanic, right? The band has finished playing Near to God to Thee. People are bouncing off the propellers. We got to go. And let me give a little credit to Paco Sanchez right there. He's the one who pointed out that every day, I've used this, so I'm going to credit you since you're here. He's the one who pointed out that every day is Armageddon for somebody. If it does start in 2027 and ends in 2033 or 2034, great. But what about all the people who die between now and then? The ones who die without knowing Jesus? Doesn't matter when Armageddon happens. They've already been there. It's already that's their life now. They're the ones who've gone to hell. It's done. It's over. There's no more question for them. Yes, we are on borrowed time. End of the story, right? Gun to my head, I'd say the end of the world does not start before 2027. I won't die on that hill, but if I have to put a bet, I'd say you're probably safe until then. After that, borrowed time. I don't know. What I do know is that there's going to be a whole lot of people who die before that. What I do know is that you've got 7 years worth. That's 7 years of people to talk to. That's 7 years worth of lives to touch. We don't need to be looking out for the next Billy Graham. I'm looking for the next. I'm saying that every Christian needs to be the guy who brings one more person to Christ, who ministers to those in need, who brings someone into their house, who maybe gives $20 to somebody who doesn't have it, who can be a voice of peace in a world of chaos. That's what matters. That's the only thing that matters. You are a Christian wherever you are right now. I want to hear, well, but the church isn't. You're the church. You are the congregation. You are God's hand and feet. You are a king and a priest. It is your job to represent that kingdom on this earth, wherever you are wherever you're going. The Holy Spirit will tell you where to go and what to do. The people you meet, every single one of them, is someone you were called to. Last year, I was driving. Paco knows this because I was actually driving to his office. I had done a notary job. Did nothing wrong. I'm just driving perfectly straight in a straight line on a straight road. Dude behind me loses control. All I hear is the screeching of tires and that sinking hollow thud sound that you get when you're in a wreck. The next thing I know, I'm doing the moonwalk upside down in my Kia at 70 miles an hour. I crawled out of it. Some people had to help me out because, again, I was upside down for a while, but then I kind of came to a rest and I was sort of sideways again. Not one person who looked at me was like, "You're okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I got a rib out. That's about it. I shouldn't be here. God had a plan." But the bigger point there is, there's no reason why I should have survived that. 70 miles an hour, upside down? No. I sure as the world shouldn't have crawled out. And how many people for whom the story I just told you ends with, and then the jaws of life pried their cold body out of the car. It ends in a funeral. Or multiple funerals. I've had a number of friends who've lost their lives in car wrecks. They weren't doing anything wrong. They were driving somebody else, drunk driver. Someone else loses control and jumps the curb and smashes into them. When does all this happen? I don't know. I'd say it doesn't happen before 2027. After that, I'm out. That's borrowed time. But I am more concerned with today. That's it. I'm concerned with today. You will note that all my writings, everything's basically about the beginning of the book and the end of the book. Why? Because it's the middle of the book that matters. If the beginning of the book is right, then we know God created everything. If the end of the book is right, we know that he wins anyway. That's it. That's the important thing. Well, I know who created everything and started everything. I know it's going to end up well. Let me do the things that he asked me to do to please him, because that's what I want. I want a relationship with Jesus. That's why the middle of the book matters. But it's important to remember, Jesus has called us to be not hearers of the word, but doers of the word. That's it. That's what I want us to end of. Has the final week begun? No, but it shouldn't matter. You should be in the field working so long as there's daylight, because once the sun sets, that's all there is. Whatever harvest is pulled in, that's all we got. And that's all I got for today. So I'll see y'all on Sunday. Be good.